Good afternoon, friends, family, loved ones, enemies, contributors, distractors. This is Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint. And little technical difficulties. I know I was live without saying anything. I know, like, hey, you know you're live. No, I knew I was live. I had a delay. We got thunderstorms in the area. So I didn't want the storms. I've been getting thunder and stuff, so it delayed everything. I had to go back and reset some stuff. That's why I started a little late. That's why I had a delay in the beginning without no sound, or was sound. But so anyway, hopefully the show doesn't go out. The thunder doesn't knock out my electricity, and that's what I was thinking about, delaying it. And I looked into it, and it's like it's going to be worse as the day goes on. So I'm gonna try to get this show in, knock this out. Today's show is called Race Wars, to be or not to be. And last week's show I was talking about race was the issue, and I wanted to do that show and to come into this one because the last show was basically talking about like individuals and differentiating individuals of different races that you may have relations with on a day-to-day basis, and it's separating that from the system that we talk about. And so this week I want to talk about jump to the problem. Race issues have always existed. When mankind seen that there was different races in the world, when we started expanding and seeing that there were different races, and you had to deal with when transportation became more global, when people started getting on boats or started traveling, and for trade reasons, not to travel to settle someplace, but to travel to different lands and to trade and things like this with other people of different countries and different races. And then because there's a difference, there's always going to be an issue. People always feel like their tribe was better than the other tribe, even though they may have relations. Sometimes they're not going to always do that, but sometimes the superiority thing goes into people's mind. We're better than them. You assess who you come across, especially if they're different than you. They're either more advanced or they're less advanced. Either you come there to learn from them, or you come there to teach them or to conquer them or whatnot. See if they have anything to offer you. And the race problem with black people around the world began when white supremacy became an issue for us. That became a problem for us. We had the Arab slave trade going on in Africa. But if you study the Arab slave trade, there were different race of people, and sometimes it became religion oriented. They call it the Islamic slave trade. The Arab slave trade, the slaves that they were getting in Africa were sub-Saharan Africans, and they were bringing the route back up to northern Africa, where this is where the trading was happening. So you had the same race of people benefiting from that slave trade. So that wasn't a racial thing. Northern Africans at times felt like they were superior than the sub-Saharan Africans. They were more advanced and whatnot. So they allowed them to be preyed on, or they played into the preying on them as slave commodities. And then they also traded some of them to the Europeans. The Romans would come down into Egypt and things like this to get slaves, or northern Africa to get slaves that came from sub-Saharan Africa. So it wasn't a racial thing. But once it became a racial thing, when the Europeans started flooding Africa to get slaves, they didn't care where they were from a lot of times. And that became a problem to the Africans or the black people around the world. With the transatlantic slave trade. So then race, that was an issue, became a problem to us. But then the problem became a war, and it became a war of survival. It was a war of survival for us, but later, as I'm going to talk about on this show, it became a war of self-preservation to the white supremacist system. And because of science, this is what happened. Science interrupted because white supremacy, they felt like they were superior. They had a manifested destiny that they proclaimed, that God allowed them to go around the world and conquer people of color. They thought that they were superior and or genetically advanced. But something happened along the way. Science happened. They started learning that this wasn't so. And when they found out it wasn't so, racism no longer was just about hate or bigotry or control. It became different. It wasn't just about power, it became about survival. And white supremacy became white preservation. The breakdown is something that happened. Somebody named Gregor Mendel. He was a 18. He was born in the 1800s, I believe 1822, and he became a monk. He wanted to become a he wanted to go to college and whatnot, but his family couldn't afford it, and he wanted to be a scientist. But he ended up becoming a monk because the monastery will allow him to be educated. It was like free education. So Gregor Mendel started studying. He was a monk and he did something in the mid 1800s, and he did studies on the pea plants. He was gardening in the monastery, and he was noticing the different pea plants, the different colorations, and they were purple and some of them were white. And he started to study, and he started doing like this scientific type study on why most of the plants, they had different textures, they had different heights, they had different characteristics basically, but the purple plants were the more prevalent, no matter how they would germinate them. And so he did a study. And what he came up with this study, it became Mendel's law of segregation. That's what it became known as. And it says that some of the traits are more dominant than other traits, even if they are the same type of plants, because you have the different type of plants. And he started germinating the plants to see why most of them came out violet. And his genetic, this became like a pre-genetic hypothesis on dominant and recessive traits, which became more popular in the early 1900s. Someone picked up his study and said, hey, this guy is on to something. He did 7 years of how these traits, the violet traits of this plant, these pea plants, dominated the other traits, which became known as recessive genes within, or recessive traits within that plant. Some of them were more dominant, and this is the godfather of what became the study, the scientific study of genetic and having a dominant DNA or dominant traits and recessive genes that people transferred into humans. So the study picked up when man started having microscopes and all these things like this, and someone discovered his papers, and they was like, hey, this guy is on to something. Our genes, do people have more dominant genes, traits over other ones? And of course, the way the world was at that time, with white supremacy starting to spread, they were figuring that the white genes must be the most dominant. But then as science started finding out, the white skin was recessive. This was a recessive state. And all the archaeologists and all these finds, they start finding out that the African people were the parents of mankind, and everyone else branched off from them, which was a total flip from what they believed. They believed that they were superior and everybody else branched off of them with some type of mutation, inferior mutation, and it was the opposite. And then it became, things started to change. They had the one drop rule when they started slavery. And this was for slavery purposes. They said the one drop rule came about in the 1600s. And remember, this is when the first slave ships started arriving in the Americas. The one drop rule was the one drop of black blood. If you possess one drop of black blood, you were classified as being black. If your grandparent, you had one black grandparent, then you were classified as black. And of course, what happened with slavery, there was a lot of interbreeding, and you had mulatto babies, and the laws had to be passed to where they had to classify a lot of these offspring. They were following the mother's stature. If she was a slave, then that baby would be a slave. If she was even born from the slave master, the child was born from the slave master. Whose side would it take? And in Europe, it was always you followed your father's bloodline. No matter what, if you was a king in a royal family and you had a child out of wedlock or child, and that blood was always royal. But when slavery came about and the white supremacy came about, they needed to change that, because they were interbreeding with the slaves that they had. And these slave children, and they had the one drop rule, which later became laws in America. The study of Mendel's work started becoming more, started spreading out, and scientists were picking up on it and were trying to study and re-emphasize white supremacy. And what they were finding is that there are dominant traits, there are dominant genes, and it wasn't theirs. It was yours. So along with these studies, the one drop black blood rule started becoming law in the Americas, especially after slavery was abolished. You know, you had these black people in America that was fighting for rights, that wanted the same rights as everyone else. We had this counterfeit constitution, and it was counterfeit to us. It was a nice piece of paper, nice artwork, just like a $100 bill that's counterfeit. It wasn't of any value to us. And this is what was going on. And if I'm painting that picture correctly, along 1910, the one drop rule started becoming laws in America. I believe Tennessee was the first state that passed a one drop rule, or that made it a law, that if you had any black blood in you, you could not be classified as white. Then it followed in 1911 with Texas and Arkansas both passing laws. And in 1917, Mississippi followed. In 1924, I believe West Virginia followed, Virginia, not West Virginia. So these things started becoming law, because what happens is people can challenge it. And if you don't have a law in place, then it's going to go by, okay, word of whoever the judge is or whatnot. But when you put it in the law says this, and this is what the attorneys and the lawyers can fight. It's law. This is the law of the land. And this started to become the law of the land, not just a rule. And at the same time, I'm talking early 1900s, there was a young leader coming up in Germany named Adolf Hitler. And if you think about Hitler, the Nazi Party started coming about in the early 1920s, and they had this ideology of a pure Aryan race. Why did they say pure? Because think about the one drop rule. They didn't want their people intermingling. They wanted their race to be pure. And they know that if with the one drop rule, that the black genes would be more dominant, and it would, in their minds, corrupt their race. And you had other European influences that Hitler borrowed from. Because remember, in the 1800s, Mendel said that there are dominant genes, that it's not 50-50, the mother and the father. Whoever had the dominant genes, whether it was the mother that had the dominant genes, her traits was going to overpower the traits of the father, and vice versa. If she had the recessive gene, her traits would be dominated. And so things, science started changing how people start seeing the races and intermixing of the races. And with the Nazi thing, they became not just control. He wanted the Aryan race to control and exterminate the non-white races, the impure races. And you had another movement that was happening in the early 1920s, and there's someone named Margaret Sanger. And she became popular as of late when Hillary Clinton was running for presidency. She said that that was her hero, and people didn't know who Margaret Sanger was. And there was somebody back in the early 1900s like, why would this lady be, what was it about her? And then it was all these things going around social media talking about she was a racist. And Margaret Sanger started birth control. She's the mother of birth control. She started a birth control clinic in Brownsville, Brooklyn, back in the 1920s. And she was part of the eugenics program that was in America. And the eugenics program is about exterminating or hindering the spread of undesirables. And Sanger had a quote about human weeds. She considered some of the human family weeds and some of them flowers. And she was saying that her birth control methods was about not letting the weeds spread. Now, the social media thing that went on a couple of years ago, whenever Hillary was running, they was attributing a quote for her, like she distinguished different races, the Jews and, the Polacks and things. And that wasn't the case. She didn't say that, but she did call the human family had weeds in it. And it was about not letting them spread amongst the flowers of the United States. Now, what races were seeing, this is right after, with the abolishment of slavery, what races in the early 1920s was seen as the weeds of the human family, not being equal, not being to par. You had a class system in this country. White people were at the top of the class system. They treated the Irish, they treated the Polish, sometimes they treated the Italians differently. They definitely treated black people as if they were disposable. And if you look at the eugenics program, which Sanger was a part of, that's what they were about. Most of the laws that was being passed by those that were in the eugenics program was about either sterilizing black people and Native Americans, some type of control, not only birth control, but death control. In this thing, and what I'm saying is, the race issue became a race war for survival for the white race. Because science let them know that you carried a gene, a trait that can abolish them if there was an intermingling of the races. This was a thing about biology, chemistry, and mathematics. Biology was the findings that Mendel had, Mendel's law of segregation, the dominant genes. The chemistry was, if they allowed us to interact with society without segregating us, it was going to be inevitable that there was going to be a depletion of the white race eventually, because we have a chemistry as a black people. We have a magnetic chemistry. When I was stationed in Europe, and they talk about, the women in this country and all these things, they like Americans. No, they like the black Americans more than they cared about any of the white Americans. And you talk about anybody that's been in the military, that's been anywhere to the Middle East or anywhere, the high demand, what they considered the swag that we had, the way we dressed, the way we talked, the way we carried ourselves was an attractive thing. It was nothing like everything but everyone else. You know, our fashion, that chemistry became a problem, and they knew it was a problem. And even if you look at the old photos from World War II or Vietnam or anything, the soldiers came up with the DAP, the black handshakes and stuff like this that you see the rest of America adopting. We would wear our hats different kind, and that was the chemistry that we had. And they knew that chemistry was going to be detrimental. That's why they fought so hard to keep us out of their schools, out of their neighborhoods, away from their daughters and their wives. And then the mathematics of it was, if this intermingling started happening, science was telling them that they were doomed as a people. Not now, but down the line. This was going to be a genetic extermination. So what they did, they turned that, and this is not, everyone didn't have this knowledge. And a lot of people were interracial marriages and things like that was happening, because if you thought about it in the 1800s to 17, they would never think that white men would choose black women over their own. Or white women would choose black men because they said that we were animals. We wasn't even human. We was 3/5 human for other reasons, but this is what was permeating across America. But things started to change, especially when we were free. They didn't want us here. The science and the news was spreading. So this issue, this problem, became a war for different reasons. And many of us didn't understand why. And it's you could see in our struggles and our fights. If you talk about King's dream, King's like, I had a dream, little black boys and little white girls would be holding hands and all of this dream. That dream was an American nightmare. It sounded great. It's up to chemistry was detrimental to their survival. Many of them knew this. Science was trying to find some type of alternative that said that this wasn't so. But many people knew that this was so. They have been studying this. The scientists have been studying this recessive genes that existed in the white race. And if you look it up now, they're going to say, well, it's finally been validated in 2005 that they have accepted hey, the white skin is a recessive thing. That after the Africans left out of Africa, like when you have archaeological finds and they looking for the oldest, the family tree, and they're looking for the oldest existing civilizations, they were looking in Europe. They didn't even want to look in Africa. Then someone was looking in Africa and they was like, well, maybe white people came from Africa. And this is their explanation, because they started finding civilizations older in Africa. And then the language, everything was pointing to a matriculation and a migration out of Africa to these other places. So what they were thinking, they was like, well, yeah, these people had to be white people that was in Africa. But then they start being able to check DNA. They start being able to check with the mummification thing with the Egyptians. They were able to test the older mummies. It was the opposite. Ethiopia, they was, excavating civilizations, and then they start finding bodies, and it was like the African was the first people. And not only that European or the white skin was a recessive trait, which, and now they say, well, yeah, that's the white trait started coming about after the Africans started migrating to these other places. This is what they're saying now in 2005, that they're just basically accepting. But they knew. If they didn't know, then they wouldn't have the one drop of blood rule. And it wasn't the people wasn't going to be, the scientists wasn't going to look up Gregor Mendel's law of segregation, that genes are dominant, and they knew that their gene wasn't dominant. The whole Nazi movement was about having a pure Aryan race. And if you are the most dominant gene, you're not worried. You're not going to disappear intermingling with other races. But science knew this. And this became a problem, a different type of problem for us. It became a war. And it became a war of extermination, especially in this country. Now I'm gonna read. I appreciate some of y'all showing up, able to catch the show. I know, like I said, I started a little late. Appreciate Lady Bishop, Aisha Ray. I appreciate y'all showing up, in Barbara Royal, Sakina, Walaikum Assalam, sister. Appreciate you showing up. Jasmine, appreciate you showing up. She said black people were even seen as human back then. And Coretta, I appreciate you showing up. And brother Shabazz, he said, yes, sir, dominant versus the recessive, survival became paramount, as it needs to be to us. And this is the different war. We are on a war of survival. And he said, he said, with us. And this is great. This is exactly what I'm talking about. There's a different war going on. It's not about hatred, bigotry. It's not about prejudices. And those tools are being used for the rest of society and the rest of the world to look at us in a certain way. But there's a problem. And if you look at Dr. King's dream, like I said, it seemed like a beautiful thing. But America, this was a dangerous thing. And many of us have been unaware. And I hear some of these people, they talk about race doesn't really exist. Race is just a construct. Some guy came up with this race concept. And I'm like, okay, you could say that. You could say race is a construct. And my argument to some of them people, all I know is, I don't care if you call it well, animals, they don't call it a race, right? You got polar bears, you got grizzly bears, you got black bears. They're all different. 2 black bears are going to continue to have black bear cubs. 2 grizzly bears going to have grizzly bear cubs. Polar bears are going to have polar bear cubs. And it's going to continue to be like that. It's not going to be 2 polar bears that's going to get together and have a black bear, and vice versa. So we know that there are separate species of bears and other things. So there's different species of people. 2 black people are going to continue to have black babies, but we can have albino babies and things like this. 2 white people are not going to have a black baby or a yellow baby or a brown baby. And if you have a situation where you have 2 yellow people and they have a baby and that baby comes out black, you need to do some research in your home, some investigation. So people could tell me it's only one race, and that's the human race. And to me, that's part of the problem. You're very unaware. I don't care. You could say race is a construct, and I submit to you this. Money is a construct too. And it's very real. You're going to hold on to your money. Everyone trades and buys and sells with money, right? It is real. It's something that man has constructed. Yeah, you could say man constructed this race concept, but I don't care what you call it. It exists, and it's very real. And Malcolm X had a quote. He said, only thing that's worse than a blind person is a person that has vision. Has sight and no vision. Those that can't see what's happening. And I believe this has struck us in this country. Many of us can't see what's happening. And like I was saying with the whole civil rights thing, fighting for civil rights is a needed thing because that's the law. But believing that you can appeal to this country's moral consciousness, and it has no moral consciousness. War has no moral consciousness. It doesn't care about feelings. It don't care if you're tired. It don't care if you're sad. It don't care if you're mad and you're protesting. It don't care how good your intentions are. It don't, like Dr. King had great intentions. It wasn't going to mean anything because this is a war of survival. We didn't know. We talk about a pending race war, like, oh, they're trying to start a race. The war has already started over a century ago. This is what I'm saying. The war has no conscience to it. So it doesn't matter how patriotic you are. It don't matter how well you could run the ball and how well you could pass the ball and make baskets and things like this. How well you could play a sport and how well you could wave around their flag and how many of us join their military or whatever. How many of us join their politics. The point still stands. And the war has been ongoing. It's just many of us do not realize what it's about. The Constitution has been counterfeit to us. And we keep looking for value in it. And that's fine. Do it. Fight the wars in court. Get things done. And I'm not poo-pooing on anything that has been fought through civil rights. But I'm saying that's happening here, and over here we have been at war. They have slowly been poisoning our people. They have been poisoning our minds with the education system. Things that they know existed, they haven't been teaching us or them or their kids, because it doesn't matter. Psychologically, they've been poisoning our mind to make us look negatively on our own and even our roots. And now with this media that goes on social media, we are able, in this internet, we're able to find out things that we never knew before. They use the media against us, and we love the media. And when I'm talking media, I'm not talking about the news. I'm talking about movies and TV shows. We embrace the movies about our own destruction. And when I'm talking media, also I'm talking about music. We embrace the music that's talking about our own self-destruction or demeaning each other, calling our women out of their names. Women accepted that and saying, I'm a bad bitch. Yeah. You're embracing it. This is something that has been imprinted upon us. So this is how they're slowly poisoning our people, generation after generation. It gets worse and worse. They have been doing it with our bodies. They have been trying to give us alcohol. The same thing they did to the Native Americans. They called it fire water. They couldn't handle it. They saw that they couldn't handle it. This was something new to them. So they used it against them. The natives wanted it. Oh, I like this feeling I get from it. They turned them into drunks, and then they knew that they would be hungover, and they knew that they wouldn't be able to fight, and then they would invade them and conquer them. In the early mornings. And then they gave us drugs. I mean, you were seeing, we all had those uncles that used to be alcoholics. We all had some of the, people poisoning themselves with this alcohol. It was alcohol stores, liquor stores, all throughout the black community. And I remember talking to a brother on the phone one time, and I was at work, and I was in another side of town talking about the liquor store thing. And I said, we did an experiment while I was on the phone. I stopped the lady at the gas station. I said, excuse, bad as it look, I'm a black guy in their community. I'm looking for a liquor store. I don't drink, hadn't drank in decades. But I was asking her for a liquor store. She was like, man, I don't know. Geez, she looking. Maybe if you go like a couple of miles down here. But in our community, you're going to see a liquor store. If I ask someone in our community, oh, it's going to be one right here, and it's going to be one down the street there. They got better alcohol. They're going to tell you all of it. They're all around us. And they've been poisoning us with the malt liquor. And this was something when I was growing up. They came out with this malt liquor, and Billy D. Williams used to be on these malt liquor commercials. It was cool. Drink this malt. They wasn't selling that to them. This is something for blacks. It was on BET commercials and things like this. Our music was the 40 ounces and all these things like this. Poison our mind. Kids can't wait to get their own 40 ounce. That was part of being cool. They did it, and malt liquor was something that was more potent than regular beer. So they knew that we was drinking the beer, but they needed to come up with something that they designed especially for us to be more potent and be more, cause more alcoholics in the community. Alcoholics, they call them, some of them functioning alcoholics, some of them not functioning. We always seen those people. You know, before they brought the drugs in, then the heroin became big. And we were selling it to each other in the 70s, the 60s, the late 60s, the early 70s, throughout the 70s. And that was part of the slow poisoning of a people. And it had nothing to do really with hatred. That was extermination. That was a war. Then followed the heroin. That became the crack, the Iran-Contra. And what I'm getting at is everything has been progressively worse. They're introducing things that have been progressively worse. Then they came with the diseases. We heard about the Tuskegee experiments where they was injecting what they had then. It was syphilis at the time and trying to see they were studying the traits. What does it do to them? And when you have something that you know, when you're trying to exterminate something, or you say, well, man, I got fire ants or whatever you have, bees, that they study the effects of the chemicals they want to use against them. And they keep making them better. They keep developing new things that would treat the undesirable pests that we have. And this is the same thing that they have done with us. It has gotten progressively worse. A heroin addict, before they got really bad, it took a little while. The crack thing, first blast, is like a lot of people was hooked. And they looking for that first blast again, and they gonna keep it. Then they start turning on their own. And not only that, the money they was getting from it, the ones that wasn't doing it, that was selling it, then they gave them guns, and you got to fight for your territory. So now we have people killing each other all over possession of this drug, selling of this drug, in territory to do so. Then what was happening, you had the crack babies. Long-term effects. The diseases, like I said, they did Tuskegee, then they did AIDS. Black and Hispanic males were the main victims of the AIDS epidemic. But in our communities, we had the less amount of homosexual. They called it like a homosexual disease or virus. And that's what they sold America on. But with that being said, and I think Reagan them called it the something like the homosexual bug or something like that, when they were trying to tell them this stuff is starting to spread. See, science doesn't work altogether. This is something that we have to get out of that. You have scientists or people saying, hey man, there's something going around and this is not, we need to do something about it. Just like it was with COVID. It was, hey man, something's going around. They telling, at that time, the first Trump administration is like, nah, man, that's the China bug. Just like they did with AIDS. Nah, that's the homosexual thing. And a lot of the information that was being spread when COVID first started coming out, a lot of people saying, well, black people don't get it. And then we start dying. A lot of us started dying. And this is what has been happening. We had the Tuskegee experiment. Then we started getting AIDS pushed in our neighborhoods, and everything has been now. And I'm going to go back to the eugenics when I was talking about Margaret Sanger, the mother of birth control, talking about controlling the human weeds and not letting them spread in the Garden of America where the flowers blossom. The eugenics program, if you look at the program itself, it was against people of color. And I believe they stopped the eugenics program in 1970s, early 70s. They were doing things with all type of the women that were having babies. They would tell them they can't have any more baby. They would do things. They would say, or they'd give them C-sections, things like this, or they was making it the worst birth possible because they were trying to control. It was birth control and it's death control. That's what the eugenics program was about. Birth control of a certain group of people and death control throughout this nation. They have been trying to control our death rate and not control it in a good way, but control it in a negative way for us. And with all this happening, you look at America's rap sheet. If America was a person that was going on trial, she's guilty of murder, mass murders. Not self-defense, she's mass murder, serial killing type murders. She's guilty of rape and kidnapping, and the list goes on. Theft. This is America's rap sheet. And we have been in the dark because we have not been understanding the battle that needed to be fought, or the fact that we was even at war. As a white individual, I care less. Except for the last show, I was talking about those that were neutral. This lets me know how to categorize our relationship. If you're not out there to speak out, then, hey, when it's time for war, I don't need nobody standing there watching and then acting like they're my friend. I'm under fire and I'm firing back. This is a wartime. There's no time for peace type activities. I remember there's a saying, when the enemy is at the gate, and I'm going to paraphrase this. The enemy is at the gate. The enemy is on the horizon. There's no time for peacetime's luxuries. That means you got to be preparing for the war. It's no time to be partaking in these peacetime luxuries and comforts. There's no time to be getting good sleep. There's no time to be playing games. You need to be focusing on preparation for the war that's at hand. Because these people that's coming, they're going to take away all those luxuries anyway. And we've been kept in the dark about understanding the battles that we need to fight and the fact that we are at war. Derek said the Constitution was never made for us in mind, and we have to understand that. So I don't mean when people keep talking about, man, the Constitution or the law says this, they don't care about the law. The law, police are not supposed to murder people. So since when has that stopped it from happening? The police are not supposed to be judge, jury, and prosecution or executioners. But since when has that stopped them? We could cry about it all we want, but we have to come to the realization of where we're at, where we stand. We're fighting the wrong fights. We fight each other harder than we fight the system. We fight each other more than we complain about what's happening in the system. We complain about it a lot, but we don't do anything about it. Nearly as much as we fight each other. We want to fight and debate with each other. We want to kill each other for less. We have more venom for each other than we have for the system. And what I'm saying is we have to understand. They got us battling each other. It's a war of the sexes that has been going on. Black men against black women. No other race. No other race. I don't see that with no other race. I don't see Mexican men against Mexican women. I don't see the Asian women against the Asian men. They talk about the Islamic world and the women are so oppressed and stuff. I don't see Arabic or Islamic women against Islamic men with the picture that they try to paint. Oh, they're suppressed. The Indian woman, oh, the women in India, they're under oppression and they're not allowed to do what we're. I don't see them against their own people. I don't see them going against their man. But the battle of the sexes, that's birth control. As far as creating black babies, they're trying to destroy the ones that we do create. The battle of the sexes is not just us talking about black women and black women talking about what black men don't do. It's also once that child is born, it's enabling that child to come up in a broken household because you're more worried about your relationship with that child's mother and allowing those differences to break the home. One way or another, whether it's her doing it or you doing it. We mended together. We got together to make that child. We got to do something together to make sure that child has the optimum venues of survival. But that's birth control. Every black man's death is a victory in the war for them, for whatever reason. Whether it's drugs, whether it's gang warfare, just violence, period, with us. We talk about, and I say this all the time, black on black crime and white on white crime, it's all the same. It's up for us. We should be more concerned with it. I'm not going to let them sit up there and talk to me about black and black crime and act like that's something you could point your finger, because you do it too. But I'm not concerned about you. I'm talking about us. We in the huddle here. We in the huddle. It's a timeout. We're in a huddle talking about strategy. I'm worried about what the other team is doing to us that's effective. I'm worried about how we can fight what they're doing to us, what we're allowing them to do to us, how we can stop it. So every black man's death, every black man's incarceration is a victory for the other side. We have to look at it as such. And if you think about our youth having been going to prison, but they wear that's a badge. That's a skin on the wall, man. You know, they even brag about it. They're proud of it. When I was talking about the war on our minds, the media, the control, the psychological warfare that they're permeating on our people, and we got our youth, our young men proud that they was locked up. I ain't got no problem with being locked up. I got a problem. I always had a problem with being locked up. Any animal has a problem being locked up. We seem to ingratiate that. That's part of the bravado of our younger people now. Every homosexual relationship is a victory for the system. That's birth control. You do what you want to do. I'm just stating what it is. If I believe that they are worried about birth control in the black community, that's a victory for them. Us being economically unaware and unengaging in self-economics, that's a victory for the system that is systemically trying to exterminate our existence for self-preservation for its own. Us not teaching each other any type of survival tactics, surviving in this system. I'm talking about surviving in this system, against this system, how to work and maneuver within a system that's against you. And we just sending our kids out there to fail or rolling the dice and hoping that somebody else don't kill them, or that they don't get hooked on drugs, or they don't end up on a pole or on a corner or whatever in poverty. And we're not teaching them the basics of self-survival, self-preservation. And you could say, well, I'm going to be a congressman. I'm going to do, that's fine. I'm not talking against any of those things. As long as you have the mind to understand, that's a temporary thing. You could fight for these laws, but at any time, it doesn't really matter. If we're not looking for ways to survive Self-preservation. I ain't talking about asking the system, appealing to the system, appealing to the moral consciousness of the system. If you don't know how to protect your home, if you don't know how to use a weapon, if you don't know how to garden, and if there's people in our community that know how to garden and they're only doing it for making a salad for themselves and not trying to teach, and if you're not going to them to get it, and it's just like me having a vehicle and I don't know how to work on it. Or me having a weapon and I know how to shoot it, but my neighbors don't, my family don't. They can't protect their own household. There's a structure, there's a list of things that we need to learn how to do. And us being environmentally and economically and without a village type concept, don't know how to bond with each other, don't know how to communicate with each other, even though we have differences, and so that becomes a dividing line. That becomes that Willie Lynch type thing. I don't deal with them brothers because they Christian. I don't deal with them brothers because they in the Navy. I don't deal with that sister because she's doing this. That's a divide and conquer that they are putting out there. Instead, we looking at the past or whatever, and they're instead of looking at a future. Everybody's not going to convert to what you believe in. But you do have to be aware of who you're dealing with, and I understand that. But we have to come up with a plan and a goal. We have to come to the realization. We have been at war. The history of this country has told us that we have been at war. It has nothing to do with who likes you and who don't like you. You could like them. They could like you. But that's not going to change things. If you look at what happened in Nazi Germany, a lot of those Jews, so-called Jews that was there, they had German friends that watched them get drugged out in the street because the system was doing it. They're not going to put themselves on, on the line for you. Just like if you look at Mexican and America here, some of their own people are watching them get drugged out in the street by ICE. And some of them may say something, but they're not going to do anything about it. They'll come right in the heart of the Mexican neighborhood. And it'll be 5 or 6 of them. And they'll stand there and they'll yell at them, dragging this person on the ground and doing all this abusive stuff. And they'll sit there and they'll put their phones up instead of putting their guns up. Now, I'm not advocating for the violence, but I'm saying I'm going to turn on the TV or look at the phone tomorrow and I'm going to see violence against Mexican, killing another Mexican on the south side or on the west side of San Antonio or whatever in LA. But then I'm not hearing about those people gunning down anybody that's doing something undesirable to their people that's outside of them. Same thing in the black community. I'm going to turn on the news. I'm going to hear about another killing, another drive-by, another car being shot up, another stray hitting a baby or whatever. I'm going to hear about all of that. But I'm not going to hear about us defending our own against outsiders. And they're constantly coming into abusing us and doing whatever they want to do. And people going to send me a video. You see what they did to this sister? You see how they slammed this sister down? You see how they... And all I could do is think about, that's not going to happen to mine. And the death come with it. Mine's or whomever. It's not going to happen to mine. This got to be our mentality when holding down. What good is a village if it don't have a fort? If you can't protect it? If you can't control the manipulation that's coming into it? Well, I raised my kids. Yeah, but your kids, you're not controlling what's coming into your neighborhood. You're not controlling what's coming into your household from the TV. You tell your kids, I don't like this friend. I don't like you hanging with this. I don't like this person coming to stay tonight, whatever. All our parents always told us stuff about our friends, but you're not controlling what's coming in through the TV. You're not controlling and having that discussion what's coming in on the music that they listening to. Because many of us are sitting up looking at the same type of movies, listening to the same type of music, having the same type of friends. Yeah, my brother, he cool. Yeah, he's cheating on his wife, but whatever. This brother, yeah, this sister, yeah, man, girl, you, for real, you did that. So and so, man, you wow, you know, all of these, those are not like situations we accepting those type of people around us instead of schooling them or trying to, you know, we should be acting as if we're at war. That's all I'm saying. We got to act like we are all we got. The law is the law, and you fight for the law because, and should we vote? I'm going to ask y'all, should we vote? Yeah, hell yeah, we should vote. There's nothing wrong with voting. We pay taxes. They going to take our money out of our paychecks or whatever. We going to pay our taxes. So why not try to control or have some type of control over who's delegating the laws and the rules in our community, or using our voter strategic things on a higher, whether it's the gubernatorial race or the presidential race, I don't care. The Senate, the House, yeah. But see, I'm not talking about them as far as the village. They're not part of the village. So this is what I'm talking about. We got to control what's happening. We got to start building a fort. And that fort is to control what's coming in and out of the village. And that's what I'm getting. I appreciate Derek showing up. He said the Constitution was never made for us. I think I read that. Barbara, she said, teach, brother. Teresa, she said, sad but true. And that's what I wanted to get across. I see the storms let me make it through the show. And hopefully I'll have a better show for y'all next week. Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint. Peace.